I've got a bit of a problem with the way that elements of the media continue to talk about Green Senator Lydia Thorpe. Don't get me wrong, not these guys.
Probably the rudest, nastiest, the most abusive politician in federal parliament.
I think she thinks that she's starring in some kind of reality TV show. She sees every day as an opportunity to pull a stunt. Her only concern is making herself the centre of attention and shocking people. I think she is the greatest fake in Parliament.
I mean, those little guys are just doing their job, their full-time salaried job. They've got to attack left figures because that is their full-time paid salaried job. If they're not being as rude as we're constantly being told that Lydia Thorpe is, well, then they're being the toothless left and, you've ceded ground to the right. But if they are being as rude as we're constantly being told that Lydia Thorpe is, then they're being really, really rude and we must never stop talking about it. So I get it. Ben Fordham, Andrew Bolt, they've got to do that, what they do. Otherwise they lose their money. So good on them. What I'm talking about is sort of press outlets that I naively expect something a bit more substantial from, who continue on with this Lydia Thorpe's rude shit. So we had this article about a year ago in The Age, and in particular, I suppose I am just talking about The Age, from Paul Sakal, a meeting that was held between Lydia Thorpe and Auntie Geraldine Atkinson. She's co-chair of the First People's Assembly of Victoria, and it is said in that meeting that Lydia Thorpe was very, very rude. So Lydia said, in response to The Age, that it was a robust discussion. This is last year, 2021. And she said, we enter Parliament not to make friends, but to get results for our people. This goes hand in hand when we're talking about this Lydia Thorpe bashing festival. You have to look at the commentary from figures like Bolt, who said,
Now, if any Liberal MP abused an Aboriginal woman, made her cry, made her so stressed that she needed treatment from a nurse, if any Liberal MP, Scott Morrison maybe, was so rude to this Aboriginal woman that their own staff were horrified and apologised, you would not hear the end of it.
If what he means is, if a white Liberal MP did this to an Indigenous rights activist or, co-chair of the First People's Assembly of Victoria, then it would never be tolerated. Well, that may well be the case. If it was a non-Indigenous person silencing or running over an Indigenous person in a private environment, then maybe that would be received somewhat differently. But I think if we stop being Bolt-style disingenuous for money for a second, then we can agree that probably two Indigenous rights-focused people in a meeting who are rude amongst each other, probably that is a bit different makeup and should be considered a little bit differently. That doesn't grant Lydia, or indeed any Indigenous politician, the right to run roughshod over every Indigenous person they end up in a private room with, but that's not what's being proposed here. We're only talking about one meeting. But let's cede ground for a second. Let's go, okay, well, maybe Lydia's a bit rude sometimes. Well, is that the first time that a politician in the business of their job, their very high-pressure job, has ever been rude? Because I wouldn't imagine it is, right? But despite that fact that it was just one meeting, the articles continued, very much centering that meeting, but also talking about other instances of Lydia being rude and abrasive in public and less public environments in the course of her work as a senator. This is an article from 5 months ago by Jack Lattimore. Look, I like Jack. We get along. I talked to him for my second instance of my Sovereign Citizens video. But there's this article, it got a lot of flack from Indigenous people, or for a lot of left people online for this article from 5 months ago, which, it delves into Thorpe's history and talks about instances where she's been rude and abrasive, including that meeting that's been brought up again, the one from a year ago, but then also kind of gives you the impression that there's more that can be said in the fullness of time, but isn't yet being said. And so because this impression has been lent by articles like that, you're like, okay then, well, I expect that in the fullness of time we'll hear more about what lies behind all this coverage of how rude Lydia Thorpe is. And yet, 5 months on, just published today, there's this article from the chief political correspondent, David Crowe, in The Age, saying Lydia Thorpe is a cyclone making landfall in the Greens. An alternate headline on the main page described her as diabolical. And what are we going into? Remember, this is published today. The meeting from a year ago again. Auntie Geraldine Atkinson, about how rude Lydia was in the meeting. We're back to talking about the meeting and the mega rude meeting, Lydia. The rudest meeting of all time it is. Just the first time a politician has ever been rude in a meeting, The rudest meeting on earth. Patricia Karvelas has leaked talking points from the Greens sent to MPs in relation to Lydia Thorpe. What is the media supposed to say back? This is internal stuff for the Greens, and that's been leaked out, which, suggests that there's sort of conflict among the Greens on the question of, I suppose Lydia and maybe there's a sense of factionalism going on. And so maybe it's just internal Victorian Greens squabbling over how deathly rude Lydia Thorpe is that's leading to this. I mean, between you and I, as someone who's sort of, I suppose, the Greens' target demographic, I kind of feel like they should probably be sorting out their internal disputes regarding their transphobes before they get on to the question, the no doubt very important question of how rude Lydia Thorpe is. But I digress. To me, the interesting thing is, though, in a lot of this coverage, yes, there's the worst, rudest meeting of all time. They keep going back to that, and several other things. But the bulk of this coverage tends to go back to Lydia's tendency to do things in Parliament, like swearing in behind me right now, or calling the Queen a coloniser. Various things where she's bad and rude in Parliament. Very rude. Does stunts. Are the stunts a problem? Is it the stunts that's the problem? Because cards on the table, I don't really give a fuck, and I think a lot of people would share my view here. I don't really give a fuck so much if Lydia is rude or abrasive in the course of her job. In fact, I get the feeling that Lydia, whether it be through the rudeness and abrasiveness or confrontationalism or, the stunts, if you could call them that, is, being a staunch, Indigenous rights-focused Indigenous senator. I think that would be how you could describe it. I could also alternatively describe it as a populist way of doing politics, as in left populism, left Indigenous rights-focused populism. And I not only don't have a problem with that, but I think to myself, well, isn't that kind of what people want from the left? Isn't that what people want to see from politics? Let's take another person who's regularly described as populist and who does stunts occasionally in Parliament and who can occasionally be rude and abrasive and create headlines in their interactions with other politics. This fuckwit behind me, mind you, I am not comparing anything in the realm of Thorpe and Hanson's politics. Thorpe is a dedicated woman. She means exactly what she says. It's her fight is her lifelong one. This fuckwit just gloms onto whatever is going on in the broader far-right milieu to, drum up a few votes out of it. She doesn't mean anything, you know what I mean? That's my view. And indeed, left populism and right populism are as different as the left and the right are, But more to the point, and the reason I bring Hanson up, it is not the rudeness of Pauline Hanson, nor the stunts occasionally that get to me, nor the ability to generate headlines. It is the substance of her politics that I don't like. It's the fact that she's a fucking racist dog. And on the matter of the substance of Lydia's politics, I'm there all the way, I love it. I'm glad that there's showy, rude and abrasive senators like Lydia, I really am. I think people are calling for left populism, Indigenous rights focused populism, and there you go, someone's answered the call, and now we're all worrying about how rude she is. Maybe we're going to have to reassess if all these purported, things that we can't talk about yet, but they're really bad, come out one day. Maybe we're going to have to do that. But as it stands right now, you know, you have to wonder, don't you? You have to wonder that if there's all these bad things, but we can't say anything about him yet, but we just don't like the way that she's rude. You know, any press element that's towing that line for too long, you have to wonder, do they not like the fact that there is a strong, aggressive, abrasive Indigenous woman showing up for her politics and being showy in Parliament? Does that get to people? And if it does, why? What's the problem? Let's dig deep. So if you have any better answers than me as to what the fuck's going on here, then, you know, tell me in the comments. And thanks for watching. If you appreciate the work I do on a weekly basis, then you can always chuck us a claim at patreon.com/TomTanuki. Cheers.